Hello and welcome. I'm Denise Anthony from the Institute for Security, Technology and Society, and we are very happy today to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Cyndi Rowland, who's going to be talking about web accessibility issues. I wanted to mention that this talk is part of the Dartmouth Center's Forum theme this year on Speak Out, Listen Up. And I think that's very relevant because if you want to speak out and use technology, you have to be able, everyone has to be able to access it. And certainly if you want to listen up, which means, you know, getting access to information or resources, if those are online, then we want to make sure that those are accessible to all individuals and all groups. And some of you might be here because I think there is now a little bit more public attention to especially accessibility of college websites and resources. So I've been just looking at the Chronicle of Higher Education has had a couple of stories. They covered a study, an NSF-funded study and this summer in which they found that college web pages remain widely inaccessible to people with disabilities. Let's see. And he also said something that I think should be familiar to the computer security and privacy community, not too many of whom are here today, but the idea that accessibility issues are often addressed after the fact. People build the website or build the online resource and then say, oh, we need to make this accessible, and they do it after the fact. And we know that security and privacy is often created in much the same way. It's developed and then people say, oh, how are we going to make this secure or keep the information private? So, so I think that there'll be lots of interest in that. I also wanted to mention then the December Chronicle article that was that highlighted the best and worst college sites for blind students, and it looked at 183 universities. And Dartmouth was ranked number 53, which I thought was, at least we were in the top third, and I think that's a good thing. But obviously we ourselves have a lot to learn and in making our resources accessible to all of our students. So with that in mind, please join me in welcoming Dr. Cyndi Rowland. She is the Executive Director of WebAIM, which is a community of developers, webmasters, individuals with disabilities, and others whose goal is to make the web more accessible to people with disabilities. And she's also the technology director of the National Center on Disability and Access to Education, both of which are at Utah State University. So, Cyndi, welcome.
Thanks. And I'm excited to be here. It's my first time in Hanover. Oops, I guess I should not walk too, I'm a wanderer, so I promise that if I wander, I'll pick up the lavalier mic. All right, so what I can mention here is that we've got, about 50 minutes or so. And I want to make sure that this time is relevant for all of you. Of course, I've prepared way more material than I could possibly get through. And I just want to get a sense of the content that folks were hoping to hear. So let me ask this question first. How many of you are familiar with the phenomenon of web accessibility as it pertains to people with disabilities? A little show of hands, okay? How many folks would say, you know what, I'm kind of new to this and could use a bit of a primer? Okay, so we're pretty well split. So what I'm going to do is go through some of the pieces that I've prepared which do walk through the phenomenon. For those of you that are more expert, you can comment as you'd like. But I would like this to be informal. I'm sure much to the chagrin of our videographer, who then won't have the audio for that. So at any point in time, please just jump in. Let's have this time be an interactive time, a time where folks can get information that they'd like. And before I do hop in, anyone want to shout out what they are hoping to learn learn or to get or to interact with in the coming hour? Yeah.
I do a bit of sort of web development in my spare time, and I've gone through sort of phases where I'm like a huge nerd for making sure that all of the HTML is semantically correct, and you know, you're separating out the visual, the styling from the markup.
The content from the, yeah.
Right. And then I've kind of bounced down from that and said like, well, but you know, I'm not sort of seeing these users that I'm supposedly optimizing for. And I guess this sort of like tension between the real person hours that it takes to make a semantically correct and accessible website, and the sort of like difficulty from a developer's perspective of seeing the value that you get from that, how to negotiate that is something I'd like to see.
Okay, we will definitely talk about that. Any other things folks would like to visit? Yeah.
I'd like to know what kind of standards are upheld as trying to look at a website and say this is acceptable and it's not accessible.
Okay, we can do that too.
And how big is we want to think about it as a problem. Like how extensive is this? What do we need to do something about it, and what would that take?
Okay, good. So I've got these three. At certain points when I think I've covered it, I'll ask you guys if I have. And if I haven't, you know, just keep at me, okay? Anything else? All righty, okay. So this is no surprise to anyone. The web has completely transformed our society. I'm sure you all feel that, as do people with disabilities. But the effects for them are certainly different than the effects that you feel, because they're seeing this transformation that is just out of reach for them. So a question that I have is, before I get to the question, here's my kind of advanced organizer for the session. This is stuff that I prepared. I wanted to talk briefly about the context, the user experience, a little bit about laws. And then in WebAIM's journey, I'm going to make sure I hit all of the questions that you guys have. But, you know, when you think about your own experience, you know, I'm thinking about the very first question that you brought up, which is, I'm not seeing the benefits from my use, or the expenditure of my time. And I had an interesting conversation, I think it was with you, Tom. Wait a minute, Anna, it was somebody today who indicated that on this campus, there are no individuals who are blind. Would anyone want to counter that assertion? This is.
Well, I didn't have that conversation with you, but
yeah.
I'm director of the program that serves students with disabilities, and that is true as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Nobody's come to us for services.
Which is very interesting in and of itself, because the national data on students that enroll in post-secondary education with vision impairments, or even just the general population, 4% of the general population have severe vision impairments, as in they are blind, legally blind, something where you would have an expectation that they would need an accommodation of some sort. So if Dartmouth College has none of that, well, I'm just wondering what that's saying. So I'm thinking back to your experience. You are, I'm assuming, doing some of your work for the college, and you're wondering, why am I doing this? But there may be a different context at play, one that we can't entirely discuss here. But I think it's an interesting discussion to have at the level of the college. Because why would it be that there would not be predicted levels of participation by people with disabilities on this campus? And I hate to use the bus analogy, but I'm going to at this point in time. There was, before the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, was enacted, they were getting comments from lots of people, and bus drivers and owners of bus companies were pushing back, saying, well, why would we need to put lifts in our buses because no one with wheelchairs ride our buses? Why are you making us do this? And of course, people with disabilities said, we aren't there because we can't get on the bus. Is there possibly a phenomenon here that some students who might want to come are at a disadvantage? And maybe not. Actually, you guys have had a lot of efforts in making your sites accessible, so I'm not trying to infer that that's, the case. But it does speak to your issue of, where are my efforts going if I'm not seeing these people? So we've got lots of folks who are disadvantaged by inaccessible web content, and I'll get to a better definition of that in a bit. But folks that have vision problems, folks that are deaf or severely hard of hearing, which actually is me in any bar. I automatically have a hearing impairment, is what I'm telling you. And a lot of you have hearing impairments in labs if they are, if there's a requirement for them to be really quiet, because then you can't turn up the sound. So you functionally have a hearing impairment yourself. Motor function refers to the dexterity. Sometimes people don't have the control, the stamina, the precision to use a standard mouse and keyboard. Certainly individuals with cognitive impairments, and that runs the gamut from traumatic head injuries that we may see in individuals who've been in car accidents or returning veterans. We may see that in folks that have developmental disabilities, or even some serious learning disabilities would be considered, a cognitive impairment. Seizure activities, and then the last one, age-related processes. Actually, I'm starting to now fall into that, which is, combinations of any of the above. So those are typically the folks that we're talking about when we are talking about web accessibility and what it is affecting. So what does it affect? Well, it affects the web, and I'm skipping ahead in my content, but I'm going to do it anyway. About 8.5% of the U.S. population, this is based on the census in 2000. We can't wait to get our little mitts on this last census. But about 8.5% of the population have disabilities of an extent that you would expect would inhibit web or computer use. So we've got some facts about who it is going to impact and the amount that it would likely impact. But then the question is, what does it impact? So just throw out some ideas. So how are you guys using the web? Some of you are students, some of you are faculty, some of you are staff. So what web content are we talking about here at this college? Yeah.
There are documents that you use for assignments, and then there's podcasts for like audio and video and presentations that you can download.
Great. So course content, okay? So that's one. What's another piece of web that if you were one of those in the group you might be missing out on?
Would sometimes survey, even a quiz online, or even just other kinds of survey
specifically for classes.
For a class.
So I'm thinking assessments within a class. Okay, so that's another. Any others?
Online research through libraries.
Perfect. Okay.
Ticket purchases.
Exactly. And what's your favorite ticket to purchase here on this campus?
Me?
Yeah?
Dartmouth football ticket.
Okay, all right. And you would probably hate to relegate that to someone else to have to purchase for you. They might get the wrong seat, put you on the wrong side. That would be a horrible, horrible travesty. Anything else? It's interesting that mostly, with the exception of football, you guys have been talking about the student side. What about staff and faculty? Do any of you need the web to conduct your job? All I do, and frankly, if I didn't have it, I think they'd have to just let me go. We've got just a lot of things happening in the web. Things that maybe you were thinking and you thought, this is too schmaltzy to be really talking in a group this size, so I'll just sit and think about it but not say it. We actively recruit students using the web. That kind of front page PR piece is so important. Do you know that it costs about $4,000 to recruit a single high-quality student on a college campus? And to the extent that we are wanting to recruit from diverse communities, it is a very expensive proposition to think that you're going to get high-quality individuals with disabilities if your web presence that you're using to recruit isn't even available to them. So forget about it. Of course, the admission process, the financial aids process. I even think about housing. I think about employment, not just of students, but also of faculty and staff. Of course, the courses and the assignments and the assessment processes are part of that. But what about the campus newspaper? I'm assuming that's all digital now, correct? And I'm assuming that Dartmouth has a Facebook presence and uses other social media. Possibly, is Dartmouth using Twitter? Does anyone know? They are, okay. Other social media outlets? Does Dartmouth have an island on Second Life or anything like that? No? Maybe.
I don't know.
YouTube, okay, which I guess is where this is going to land somewhere. So the question will be, will this be captioned? Haha. If you are an individual who's deaf, could you understand what my lips are saying right now? I don't know. So we've got a lot of uses for the web, and it's not just segregated to departmental offerings and course catalogs. It's not just segregated to classes and assignments and testing. It is everything. It is how, as a staff member, in fact, Denise, are you going to process, who is processing in your office my travel?
Yeah. Nicole,
Okay.
or Sarah.
Oh, well, okay,
Yeah.
okay. So Sarah is going to have to get into Banner to process my travel. I can tell you right now, Banner would not allow Sarah to do that if she had a visual impairment. So then who does the job that Sarah is supposed to do so that my travel gets processed? It is a huge problem in higher ed, and I should say that I'm using education as one sector as an example, because I could be having the same conversation if I was talking about business, if I was talking about government, if I was talking in any other social sector. We could be having a parallel conversation, but I figured you guys wouldn't want to have that conversation as much. We know that we are all moving along here in using the web to teach 21st century learning skills. There's this wonderful dance that happens. How did you guys learn to use the web? Anyone? Well, if you're like me, you learn to use it by using it. So to the extent that anyone else did it for you, you didn't learn to do that. And that is what's happening a lot for our students, faculty and staff with disabilities. In our process to help them out, we work around the web and have someone else do it for them, which renders them, frankly, impotent when they leave this campus in having harnessed the power of the web. But we've got lots of learning management systems, we've got lots of open source materials, very cool Web 2.0 things. Mobile technologies in education have just gone crazy. Gaming and immersive environments as well. If any of you are on Second Life, I had mentioned to someone earlier today, I am Sindith Rita Nathra on World, so come and find me. And in education, we're not only dealing with our own campus stuff, but we're dealing with how it is that we are collaborating with other campuses, sharing distance learning opportunities, and sharing across country borders. A number of countries, and we'll get to this a little later as well, have regulations that deal with accessibility. So to the extent that Dartmouth is not on board with it right now, which actually it is, that's my sense of it. A lot of work to be done, but I think theoretically folks are on board here. To the extent that that this work is happening, you're going to be better positioned to move out in the ways in which technology is innovating right now. We know we've got to deal with lots of issues of coordination, collaboration, interoperability across lots of different technologies, different media, all of this. So I've already talked about this data. I'm trying to think if there's anything on here that I didn't mention. Oh, I guess it would be that about 9% of incoming freshmen are reporting a disability. Is that consistent with what you're seeing here?
Yes.
It is. So you mirror that, but you just don't mirror the latter. Okay.
The demographics of that 9%
are different. So more students that have registered themselves with your office have learning disabilities.
Have what I would call cognitive disabilities that could include the so-called learning disabilities,
Right.
which is a phrase I avoid assiduously.
Cognitive
Learning
disabilities. Oh, learning disabilities, yes. Well,
I
yeah.
think it's inaccurate.
Yeah, it's certainly controversial. That's okay. Yeah.
I have a question. It's very hard for me to comprehend, to read just about anything that has moving contents.
Mm-hmm.
So a page with a cycling image basically probably lowers my reading comprehension by maybe, like, I don't know, 30%, 50%. Is that the problem that, and I'm physically repulsed by web pages that cycle flash ads and have moving images that I cannot stop. So I'm well equipped to deal with that. But does something like that count for cognitive impairment? Or I imagine there are people who have this, who are more inclined on the, to the Asperger, autistic, whatever that spectrum is. Does that count for any sort of cognitive disability?
Yeah, well, what I can say is the phenomenon you're describing co-occurs with people that, I can answer almost the mirror of your question. It is common for people that have cognitive disabilities to have a problem with that level of focus and attention, because as soon as some stimulus starts distracting, the attention goes there and it's hard to get the attention back onto the main content. At the same time, it doesn't mean that the presence of that somehow is diagnostic of a cognitive disability. And I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I myself am personally repulsed with the flashing strobing. It physically, I have a moment where I think, am I going to throw up or get a headache? And I have to make it go away. So I think that is something that happens to a lot of people. Long time ago, WebAIM created a simulation on having an overload of cognitive function. Not that we were really thinking that we were simulating an individual that had a cognitive disability. But it was really interesting. You get a lot of visual stuff on the page, and you're supposed to somehow be focusing on something else, and it's just nearly impossible. So I think that is something that is a common experience, not only for people with cognitive disabilities, but apparently for the rest of us users. And we would probably consider that just really bad usability. And there's a nice overlap between accessibility features and usability features, I might add. So did I answer that question? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
There was a talk by Greg Conti of West Point at some point on interfacing violating the users or whatever, commercial advertising game. So he collected real examples of those interfaces, of those web pages, all sorts of pop-unders, pop-overs. But the interesting thing for me was that I just couldn't deal with those pages.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we're all wired a little differently, and your neural pathways. I don't know why my computer is doing this, but I will tell it to stop. But they give you a headache. All right. So I just want to remind folks that if at any point anyone is thinking, well, why would we do this for such a low percentage of the population? I would want to remind folks of the importance of including everyone in our society, because that is when our society benefits maximally. And I think you all know this little individual here, Stephen Hawking, who has severe disabilities and is one of the most brilliant minds in our world today. And if it wasn't for technology, we wouldn't have some of these discussions that we have as a result of his work. All right. I wanted to just I'm going to hope to spend 8 minutes tops talking about the context of users with disabilities. And I'm going to breeze by a lot of stuff just because it's already after 5 and I need to get moving here. But we'll see. Okay. So we've got folks who are blind or have low vision. And if you happen on the WebAIM.org website, you'll see articles, you'll see some video that we have there, and then you'll see this very, very old, very tired screen reader simulation. But I'm going to play it just for 1 minute, so those of you that have never heard that, in fact, let me ask that. Is there anyone here for whom hearing a screen reader would be a new experience? Okay, all right. So if I'm blind, what's happening is I'm going to use a piece of assistive technology that is going to read essentially the code, the string of code. It's going to read the HTML that is back there in a way that's logical. And let me, I believe I've queued this up, so let me go to it. Okay, so I'm not even going to, look at that, 2000, this is how old this is. It's hysterical. And you are going to hear it at a very low rate of speed. Screen reader users listen to their web content about 10 times as fast as you're going to hear it. But what I'm going to do is have you listen just for a minute. And I'm not even going to let you see the page that you're looking at, but I want you just to kind of hear and see if anything is making sense for you, okay?
University of the Antarctic Home. Table with 3 columns and 7 rows. Link. Grab it. Link for prospective students. Link. Grab it. Number 965,151,481,950. Link. Grab it. Number 965,151,535,990. Link. Grab it. Link for alumni. Link. News vertical bar. Link. Calendar vertical bar. Link. Campus diverse.
Okay. So how's that? How would you like to experience the web this way? And what was up with the goofy numbers? Any ideas?
Colors, possibly. Colors in hex.
Well, that's a very good. This was written so. And let me explain to you what has happened. Let me go to. Okay, so this is the 10-year-old site. I mean, and I'll tell you, 10 years ago, this was just a hot design. University of the Antarctic, learning like the penguins is the moniker for this university. We created this template just for the purpose of the simulation, and it's an image map. So the goofy thing that you were hearing was actually some coordinates on the server. Screen readers try to find any information that's logical and intuitive and can pull it out. And now it would do that differently. But any kind of content that a screen reader cannot find automatically, it will just grab what it can. So things that are images that are not text elements need to have text elements put in. That's as simple as that. Okay. Now I'm going to have you listen one more time. Let's see. I'm going to take this out. All right. And I'm going to go into the class calendar, or I'm sorry, class schedule, and I want you to listen It's a big snowy day, first day of class, and you need to find out what room number your biology 250 class will be in, because you don't want to go to the wrong place. You know, it's a snowy day. So let's have you listen to this.
Link survival classes vertical bar. Link things to do vertical bar. Link apply vertical bar. Link library vertical bar. Link history. Link contact information vertical bar. Link class schedule vertical. Enter. Class schedule supplement. Link back to home page. Class schedule supplement. The following classes were added after the official schedule was printed, period. This page is updated daily at 2300 hours, so availability is current as of yesterday at that time period. Table with 10 columns and 5 rows. Department code. Class number. Section. Max enrollment. Current enrollment. Room number. Days. Start time. End time. Instructor. Bio. 100. 1. 15. 13. 5. Mon, wet, fry. 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock. Mag. 100. 2. 15. 7. 5. 2, 2. 11 o'clock. 12:30. Inch. 250. 1. 15. 9. 6. 2, 2. 9 o'clock. 10:30. Mag.
Okay, how'd you do? What room are you going to?
2, 2.
That's good.
Question.
Yeah.
Do people actually develop an ability to keep track of this, possibly?
Well, no, you know, and this is, of course, showing a problem, not a solution. You would be amazed at the auditory recall of folks that have had to deal in these environments. So, yes, some can, but this is not what we want to have people do.
So a direct question would be then, since all of this web page is an object, it's a DOM tree,
Yeah.
you would want to be able to interact with it by querying it, saying, give me, after you've actually located the table and heard the rows and columns,
Right.
instead of listening to the stream, you would want to say, give me the third column and the second row.
Well, what for folks that are creating web content in standard code, there is a way to link your table headers with your table rows.
Yeah, TH.
Exactly. And that the data in the cells are associated with both of those. So all the better that I can find out that biology 250, let's see if I follow that, that room number is 6. That's all the better. Which is, of course, where we are now. For those of you that are web developers, you're doing that now, and you've been doing it for years and years, correct? Yes.
Are there browsers that would support a plugin to query objects?
Well, I think, I don't even know that that's necessary, because I think that the workaround is executing appropriate standard code so that, you know, the data cells are going to be associated with the headers and the rows.
The standard language for this would be XQuery or XQL, right? So I would imagine that, say, Players and Anya's game, right? It's a mod text-based game who program their clients,
Right.
Can easily get the gist of XQL.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the reasons that I brought up this example is that I wanted to make I wanted to juxtapose accessible and usable for you guys. This information that you heard was accessible to you because you heard it, and it was completely unusable by you. So we've got to make sure that as we're talking about accessibility, we're not just talking about can elements be detected, rather can they be used by the individual that's receiving that content. And that seems to be a huge problem in the education space. And I'm not entirely sure I know why. Maybe it's that sometimes we're not thinking of how it is that a user needs, how they're using the information, I guess is what I'm thinking. Okay, so let me get out of this real quick and go back. So that was just a really quick, and Sarah, you guys have, do you have like in a lab here, JAWS loaded so people could hear their stuff? Okay. If anyone is interested in listening to their own content on a screen reader, you can go to Freedom Scientific and you can get free 30-minute uses, 30 minutes at a time. They have it pretty tightly controlled. Okay. I want to just mention that when we're talking about vision, we're talking about an array of things. We're not just talking about blindness, but also color blindness. So here we go. This is your pop quiz. Okay, green mushrooms are okay to eat and the red ones will kill you. Alrighty, so which ones are you guys eating? If you had color blindness, essentially this may be how you would experience the page. Now, as an instructor, I know that this is how I designed it. But to the extent that I ever use color alone to denote important content, boy, I could be disadvantaging, let's see, I believe it's 5% of the male population and 2% of, or something like that, of the female population. So that's an easy one. And in fact, for those of you that are web developers, vischeck.com will allow you to see your content in an array of different color blindness schemas. The last piece of vision impairments are those that have low vision. Essentially, they blow their text up to an amazing degree, and you want to make sure you're using real text and not pixelated text. But of course, we've got folks that are deaf and hard of hearing, and you know how that is. You need to provide captions. It's really not that tough. I'm going to show you a quick little video of one of our, at least I think I am, one of our users.
If a person refers to me as being disabled, it doesn't offend me. I feel that, yes.
By the way, this is captioned, and I have no idea where the captions just went. I think it's because I didn't open it in QuickTime. Anyway, my apologies. This is typically a caption piece.
I guess, technically, I am disabled. I have an inability to hear. However, we're more of a linguistic minority.
This is where the sound begins.
Oh, really? I wouldn't have even known that. I would have just been aware of the visual picture, but not of the auditory stimulus. So it seems like there's some kind of interaction or swapping that takes place here.
The O2 goes from high concentration in the alveoli to low concentration and occupies the seats of the bus.
And then it looks like, I guess, this has gone into the heart, and then it's passing out another section of the heart. That side is hard to read. I'm guessing that there's speaking that's still going on, but again, I'm unaware as to what they're saying. And I have the responsibility now to assume what I'm being instructed on. There's a lot of guesswork involved in this. As I looked at the program, I found it interesting. There was a lot of information there that I was able to read due to the text. There was also a lot of graphic images. And because of those things, I was able to assume what was on there. A friend of mine who's hearing was able to tell me that there was spoken information on there. It didn't seem to include everything. There were some important bullets, though, I believe, in some of the parts where they had some audio types of instruction. It was more of a puzzle that I had to put the pieces together to try to figure out what it was meaning. I think that the most important thing that's done is that when there's a voice on a video, there needs to be captioning. You know, there doesn't need to be this fancy art or these extravagant graphics. It's just that everything that's said, they just need to caption it. We need access to that, and it's just that simple. I don't have any mental problems. I'm not mentally slow. I don't have any disabilities. I can think, I can read, I can write, I can do anything that anyone else can do except for here. And I want that person to respect me. And I think that that would solve a lot of problems.
That is Curtis. And again, my apologies. I have no idea where the captions that we very keenly put on there went to. More and more rich media is being put online. This is becoming more and more of an issue. Captioning is, and I could have talk to folks for an hour about captioning. If anyone's interested in that, we can talk later. We've got folks that have an array of motor skill problems, and there are adaptive switches that are used that essentially emulate keyboard and mouse functions. But the real takeaway, I actually love to have pull up a complicated site like CNN, and you know, you essentially hit the tab key to move from one link to the next, and have folks count how many times it might take me to get to like local weather. So try that sometime at home. You can't use your mouse, all you can use is your tab key, find your local weather. But for some folks, hitting the tab key is pressing on a switch like this. Now, how many times might I have to do this to get to my local weather? You know, after a while, you just wonder how folks even persist, because we can make things so difficult for them. And of course, to the extent that any developer ever does something that is dependent on a mouse, like a mouse-only kind of command, then that content is not available to someone that has complex motor problems. I love this one. It's just an old, we've got in our state Zion's Bank, but I love this. If you can use a mouse, you can get a house. So I'm thinking in Utah, if you're a person with a physical disability, you ain't getting no houses. It's not going to happen. But, and that was, you know, tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is that a lot of our society's web infrastructure is, in fact, mouse-dependent, and it is a huge problem. Same thing, cognitive skills, there are articles, there are some simulations, but we've really got to be thinking through some of this. You know, what does it mean to create a site that is going to be welcoming, inviting, and helpful to people with cognitive disabilities? WebAIM has engaged in a lot of research, and we've got a lot of writing on developing web content with an eye towards people with cognitive disabilities. So I'd invite you to come to our site and muck around on some of that stuff. But we also have to think about this in the ways in which our society is moving forward. I think you guys would all you know, agree that one of the wonderful things about something like Craigslist is it's all right there. You know, it's all smashed on the front, and you're one click from just about whatever you want. But look at the cognitive load issue. You know, what does that do as you're trying to figure out where you want to go? And to the extent that education sites are front-loading content, this could be creating some additional problems for an array of users. And I like to say that this picture is me in about 5 years. You know, as we age, we start getting a combination of problems. And the seizure disorders are real. Photoepilepsy is a disorder that can be brought on by, as you said, Sergey, the flashing, blinking, crazy animation stuff. I'm sure you guys have all heard of, you know, the phenomenon in Japan. You know, they'll release some new crazy thing, and you know, thousands of kids go into seizure states because you know, the big blinking and flashing. It's I shouldn't laugh. It's a horrible, horrible problem. Okay, I want to just talk a little bit about some other national pictures here. In education, the rate of problems in accessibility is high. Now, someone asked about standards. I think you had. Right now, we have two in this country, two prevailing sets of technical standards. And these statistics were created as folks went to one of those standards, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the two are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines out of the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Accessibility Initiative. So it's the W3C created a work group, the WAI, and they created the WCAG. So if that isn't, you know, alphabet soup, I don't know what is. They are now, WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are in version 2. So WCAG 2.0 are the prevailing professional international standards. But it's important to know that the W3C is not a regulatory body. They are just a group of good folks that want to, you know, integrate and organize the web. So nobody can go anywhere and say, you have to do the WCAG standards. Now, likewise, in the US, the federal government has created Section 508 standards for accessible electronic and information communication technologies. Where the web is concerned, there are 16 specific standards, but that set of standards is only for the federal government. So we've got these two sets of standards. One is not required because it's international. One is required if you are a federal entity. So what does a group like Dartmouth do? Yeah.
There are some federal funding sources that if you accept the funds, you make yourselves subject to 508.
To 508. I'm glad you brought that up. 508 was intended as a, in part for procurement. So the federal government is saying that we will not create, procure, maintain, or deliver anything that is not accessible. So if they pay me $1 gazillion to create something that they're going to use, of course it makes sense that they're going to pass that regulation on to me. But it's funny because as we start talking about colleges and universities, you know, what is the obligation? Well, there is an obligation, and it actually sits in Section 504 and in the Americans with Disabilities Act. But where these standards are concerned, it's not always clear what's the best way to go. And folks are making lots of different decisions. But right now, those are the two standards that have been vetted the most and have the most kind of energy around the two of them. So I hope I answered that question for you. All right. I don't know if you noticed this, but you know, we're talking about 10-year difference here. This is actually data that started the WebAIM group. This was a project that we followed this 326 colleges and universities across all 50 states. And we followed them longitudinally. And it never really got better. Now this was a different effort, you know, and the difference is this was a home page and this was one level down. But still, you know, even if you were to raise the percentage of pages that didn't have problems, I don't know, 5 percentage points, you're still, this is a tremendous nightmare right now. Yeah.
Comment on some of your numbers. I'm visiting from Australia, and we had problems with we have a national university system. We have very few private universities, and so because they're all funded by the federal government gets to dictate to universities what they have to do, otherwise they won't get their funding. So there was a huge kerfuffle after the Sydney Olympics because the Sydney Olympics website was very inaccessible.
And a lawsuit was brought.
Yes, and so universities get very scared by that, in Australia at least. And at the moment we're being required to change all of our lecture material as an academic from at least whatever it is at the moment to PDF-A to make it accessible. And that's a huge, I don't want to use the word burden because that sounds the wrong thing, but it's something we have to do. And if we don't do it, funding is dropped as opposed to there is no additional funding to do it. And it's interesting that last point you said this is 2 pages down or something like that, or the top page and one down. That's exactly what we've been told. And so as you can imagine, our top page and our one down are very simple pages. And after that, they get very complex and detailed.
Get murky, yeah. And probably quickly inaccessible.
I'm sure,
yeah. Well, we did it at a lot of levels, but I'm almost too embarrassed to even trot out the data on 3 and 5 levels down. I mean, it's diminishing returns, I guess is what I can tell you. You know, Australia has done amazing things with accessibility. I mean, in as much as I'm sure it is quite. Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. That same pattern may repeat itself here in the States. Just last night, the Department of Justice closed an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to explicitly include the internet in the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if they decide to promulgate some rules, everyone from Barnes & Noble or Amazon to Dartmouth College will need to address issues of inequity, potential discrimination in web content. So much better for all of you to make decisions now to slowly transition to what you want it to be, rather than waiting to the last minute where someone says, now you've got to do this in something that doesn't even make sense. I mean, the idea for me of creating PDFs of everything, that PDFs which are usually not accessible to begin with, just sounds like a nightmare.
No, we currently produce PDFs of everything because that, for the majority of our students, is visible on the screen and printable, and we don't want to produce 2 or 3 versions of everything for synchronization. But there is this version of PDF, apparently, excuse my ignorance, PDF-A, which I presume stands for accessibility, and it's produced by Microsoft tools, but is not produced by most open source or Macintosh-based tools.
Interesting.
And so whenever the governments and Microsoft get together, all of us left-wingers get upset about that.
Yeah. Well, it's all about tagging what's in the PDF, but I know that's going in a different direction than we're intending here. But I appreciate your experience. And, you know, that is a tension. You know, how do we, in civil society, make things available to everyone at what cost to the rest of the community? And I know that parallel discussions were had when the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacting the physical regulations. Yep, you will have ramps. Yep, if you've got stairs, you've got to have an alternate access, an elevator or something. Yep, I'm sorry, the doorways actually have to be wide enough for a wheelchair to get through. People were in a kerfuffle about that. You know, it was going to ruin Western civilization as we knew it. And you know, in this country, it was a very contentious time, and I think we're now on the other side of it enough to realize that that was an important social investment that has had great benefits. But the digital stuff is tough, and we keep moving forward.
To comment on the gentleman in the front row, as an example, I have to produce more accessible teaching materials, but I know we ask all of our students to naturally announce, not necessarily the professor, but announce their disability. We know that we don't have any challenged students in the class, and yet I have to produce materials for people that aren't there, in effect.
Right.
So it's an effort.
PDF development and complication was largely driven by DRM concerns. DRM is the technological opposite of open. Open is the technological cognate of accessible, because open formats are mostly designed to be built on by everyone. That is to say, they present the simplest possible view of information, the least ambiguous view of information. Such was the intention of W3C, for example, in all of their standards recommendations, not only accessibility recommendations. PDF, on the other hand, was intended as one of its selling point was that, well, publishers, there will be DRM in the format. it will not be so easy to access in ways you don't approve of.
All those wonderful proprietary technologies that we have to live with. So I have to say I am an open gal, but lost that battle a long time ago. All right. Let's see. On this campus, when content isn't accessible, what happens? So I am the first student at Dartmouth that comes, and I'm blind and I'm using my screen reader, so I can't get to stuff. What is going to happen? Yeah.
Well, from the student's perspective, you would have to go through the student's office, and then you would have to work with professors and try to get the workaround. So rather than like creating the content to be accessible, you have the content and then you like figure out how to make it accessible afterwards.
Bingo.
Right, well, first I was going to say, first you're going to have to self-identify.
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
gonna have to
yeah,
get through
exactly.
a process, you're going to have to
Correct.
make sure you have a faculty member who...
But eventually we get to the fact that it's going to be an accommodation, which ends up by being a fancy word for a post hoc fix. And you know, if ever there was an opportunity to get something right, technology provides us that opportunity. And doing a after-the-fact fix pretty much ensures that that student or faculty member or staff won't be getting it in real time, which is kind of the point of the web, isn't it? I go from this link to this link, ooh, I'm interested in this, and oh, shoot, now I can't get it. Now I have to ask somebody to somehow transform that in a way that I can make sense of it. We've got a lot of problems with the accommodation model, which is the pervasive model across all social sectors for content that is not accessible. It's reactive. It's just self-perpetuating, because to the extent that we continue to allow accommodations, then folks assume that that's the way it should be taken care of. And we never really get to the place where we're saying, how can this be made natively accessible? Now, I don't know, you know, in your country how much, we'll always have accommodations, don't get me wrong. Because when we're talking about accessibility, we always have to ask ourselves, accessible for whom and in what context? And trust me, if I'm making content accessible for a blind individual at my university, that's different than making it accessible for the reincarnation of Helen Keller in Ghana. See what I'm saying? There's, you know, when we're talking about accessibility, we've always got to put it in context. And yet, we've got to be thinking about how it is that creating natively accessible content can also coexist with minor bits of accommodations. Most folks in education have this mindset that they'll go to the DSO, Disability Service Office, or into a Department of Special Ed, and that those people take care of it. So there's never any personal ownership, that as a instructor, as a faculty member, as a staff member, I'm a staff assistant, and every quarter I post a schedule for my department on their website. Where am I owning that when I create that Word document, I need to have proper headings and use styles and not hit tab, bold, and underline? Because that's my responsibility. And if I'm not thinking that way, then I'm thinking somebody else does that. That's somebody else's job. And it perpetuates the problem of accommodation. We've got to get beyond that. We've got to get to a place where we all see it as part of our own work, and we all see it as something that can be accomplished natively. I'm going to zip past this really quickly, some of the legal stuff. Let me just say that there's a lot of law. And I'm just going to mention Section 504 was the first piece of civil rights legislation for people with disabilities in the U.S. Section 508 defines what web accessibility is in the context of the federal government. There is the application of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which although there have been a number of court cases on this, because it was signed into law in 1990, or as I like to say, before Al Gore invented the internet, the word internet didn't appear in ADA legislation. And ADA in Titles 2 and 3 talk about covered entity as being one of these 12 places of public accommodation. And a public accommodation is like a place of education, a place of commerce, a place of employment. And people over the years have argued in courts that the internet is not a place. So how can the law, the ADA, apply to something that is not a place? But of course, I like to say, if it is not a place, then why is it that I am there? And how did I get there? Anyway, they're trying to get this all figured out. And there have been many successful lawsuits against inaccessible web content under ADA regulation. 26 separate states have state laws. New Hampshire is not one of them. But there's also the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as an international law, and they have Section 9, which is its own section in that treaty that deals with accessibility, both of the built environment and of information communication technologies. And then, of course, there are country-specific laws. The EU has a 2010 initiative that is actually being rolled out in 2011, but, you know, that's the EU. What can you say? There are lots and lots of reasons why folks would want to be thinking about the legal issue. I'm just going to mention the key concerns are the timeliness rationale, that there's no way for an accommodation to be timely if I'm having to wait 3 days, 5 days for content to come back to me in a way that I can perceive it, or an effective communication issue, because the law says that an accommodation must be as effective as the regular communication. But if you look at web content, you know, it's also interlinked. How is it possible for it ever to be as effective as? It's tough. Reasonableness of accommodation, again, if you're having other people read content for people. Also the nature of the 24/7 context of the web. You know, 365 days a year I can go to, you know, thus and so such site. If I have someone who's going to help or assist me, and they're only available between 9 and 5 Monday through Friday, then we don't have anything that's in any way, you know, equivalent. And the fact that institutions, well, all sectors have an affirmative obligation to be thinking about this before there's a problem. I'm not going to read this, but you can if you want to, just to know that there is, in fact, we do have an obligation under the law to be thinking ahead of problems and not just always responding in a post hoc way to requests for help. And then the last one is that a lot of times folks will talk about accessibility being a burden. They aren't aware that the law looks at not your individual efforts as being maybe over the top, but they look at that in the context of your business enterprise. So in my state, Utah State University, if we were to claim an undue burden, it would have to be an undue burden against the entire system of higher education in the state of Utah, because that's our business context. So it's better to make the wise decisions first. Okay. Just a couple last things. Oh, I've got to just zip by here. There have been some letters that have gone out from the White House to college and university presidents recently, talking about the problems with universities requiring certain technologies that are inherently accessible. That was the Kindle DX controversy, and Amazon and Arizona State University lost on that particular court case. I've already mentioned the announced notice of proposed rulemaking, and that, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but President Obama signed on to, or signed the U.S. intent to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So there's just a lot of inertia here that may be very helpful to campuses that would choose to, you know, move in these directions. It is about 22, so we're a little bit beyond. I was very interested in talking about some of our other initiatives, but but I think we've run out of time, and I want to make sure that I get back to questions. I know I answered the one about standards. I tried to talk a little bit about you know, the efforts. And of course, part of what you're describing, you working in CSS, some of that isn't required by for accessibility, although I will say it's wonderful. I think it's the best way to go. But it is hard if you're, a lot of folks that are doing accessibility work see the accessibility piece as not that much greater than what they would have normally done. I would suspect that even if you weren't thinking about this, you would probably be coding in CSS anyway, because that's kind of the professional standard these days. And I could be wrong. And I don't know that I got to your question.
Well, a little bit, the scope and size of the problem.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah.
It's enormous.
And kind of some recent examples, I think, help demonstrate that, you know, one step forward, two steps back, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the problem is national in scope. When WebAIM talks to institutions, we're always talking about, we're encouraging people to think about their own policy and implementation development as occurring over years. Not like people panic, oh my Lord, it has to be accessible tomorrow, but you know, what would be the impact if by the beginning of next academic year, you guys actually had executive committee and faculty senate signing on to the idea of a policy? What would happen if the following fiscal year some resources were brought to bear so that people could get the training that they needed, and that that there were some systems of support in place for folks that wanted to learn to do it better before it becomes compulsory by the government. Anyway, let's see. Yes?
So we've done a lot with sort of the problem statement, which was very helpful. And I'm really curious about the solution ideas and the sort of next actions. So, for example, one thing I noticed that for a lot of parts of Dartmouth's web services, professors and like student interns are throwing these websites together. So it's not, there are lots of different CMSs that are being used, and then there's a lot of just static HTML that people are writing by hand or with WYSIWYG editors or whatever. But so I'm wondering if, for example, one recommendation that I might imagine would be that schools work on having sort of one central CMS that they really try to put all of their content into, and that way when a professor wants a website for something, the professor provides the content and can edit the content ideally through a web interface. But then there's a small group of professionals that are controlling the markup that gets put out and making sure that that's accessible. Of course, there are a lot of trade-offs there, and
Right.
one thing that means is that you're centralizing
Right.
this work of creating the web pages, and that has sort of philosophical implications in terms of like the beauty of the decentralized web. So
Right.
I'm wondering, like, is that a recommendation, and sort of what are the recommendations for universities moving forward?
You know, I certainly would never well, let me say this. I think it is easier for any kind of regulation for things to be centralized. I wouldn't necessarily recommend centralization as a way to get it at explicitly at that. I think the pushback, the potential pushback that you get from units saying, oh, if you're giving me the choice between these 4 templates, I choose none of them. You know, I don't like the structure, it doesn't work for me, I don't like the visual representation, back off. And if somehow that effort of creating a better web environment for kind of policy stuff all ends up on the backs of accessibility, I think we're actually doing people with disabilities a disservice, because somehow then they're the reason that all this is happening. That said, it is, of course, easier to do it that way. But that's not the only way to do it. I mean, there's lots and lots of models out there of how campuses that are very decentralized have done things, and done them by creating, communities of practice of professional web developers. I mean, one of the things we've got to really deal with here in higher ed is that departments with no resources get the department head's nephew's, neighbor to do a website, or at least that's happened at other places. I won't say that that's happening here. But at what point are we going to say the people that design for Dartmouth College have a minimum, these kinds of skills, and they are part of our web community that meets monthly to talk about issues, that shares pains and successes, and really start getting a lot of things going. We've got a sister institution in our state that have, they have Web Accessibility Initiative, and one person that sends everybody on their kind of web, all of the webmasters, one time a month, get a page of somebody else's page. And what they need to do is go through that institution's web policy. Is the institutional word mark there? Are they using browser safe colors? Do they conform to our accessibility policy? Do they do this? Is it secure? Blah, 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 blah. And they do that, and then that feedback goes back to folks. So people are, they're learning from one another. Hopefully feedback isn't seen as punitive and critical, but everyone is moving the ball down the field a little bit. And that's just one example, but there really are lots and lots of examples of ways in a decentralized context to get stuff going and moving.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't, as I understand, and I don't know if there's anyone from computing services or like related offices here, but I don't know that there's, I know that there are organizations on campus that sort of hand out the server space, but I don't know that there is sort of a centralized body that you would go to say, how is it that I go about making your website, or can you audit my website?
Right.
Does anybody want to speak to that?
Sarah, do you want to speak?
Yeah.
Is there a central place that people can go if they want to make their content accessible?
Well, what there is the organization that you're talking about. There is an organization that's responsible for one CMS and supports probably about 80% of the administrative and academic department websites on campus. It's called Web Services. Web Services, and it's in the computing organization. So,
let me ask this question: should the criterion be that the particular piece of contents is can be read by a particular tool or can be presented by a particular tool, or that such a tool could be written? The difference would be I write most of my class notes in plain text, so the URLs are there. They can be trivially parsed by any tool that understands the URL format. Yet, it is not marked up as a URL because I'm not writing in HTML, I'm writing in text. But this is an open format, and one can easily write a tool. But so
what I can say is at least the standards of the W3C, the Web Accessibility Initiative, they have 4 basic principles that all content needs to be perceivable, understandable, operable, and robust. And of course they have criteria for each of those. But to the extent, you said, does it need to be readable, or does it, to the extent that all content can be perceived. So you always want to be multimodal. If I didn't have vision, could I get it in some auditory context? If I don't have hearing, can I get it in some kind of visual context? If I don't have use of my limbs, can I still operate it? As long as you're hitting those things, then you're probably.
So legally, the question is: is there a program that can be used to perceive this page, or should it be rather, can such a program be written and then you'd let whoever is interested in providing that software write it?
Now, are you thinking of like a validation software, not unlike what
No. I'm thinking of basically, should mandating open formats propel us far enough along this road? or, you know?
Well, there are just as many problems in the open formats as in the proprietary ones. I mean, the issues may be that people are not using the tools that they have.
Actually, is that a fact that there are more, that the problems are comparable?
Well, here would be an example. I can go into Google Docs right now and create a document. And rather than using the styles, rather than using the headings, I can tab and bold and underline, just as easily as I can tab and bold and underline in Word. And that's an example of the same type of error, the lack of structure.
Semantic
protection. In an open and a proprietary format. That's not even, you know, I'm not even writing in HTML. I can talk about the presentation formats as well, and talk about how I can make errors in PowerPoint, and I can make errors in some of the open presentation formats just as easily. So part of it really is at the level of what it is as a user, my understanding is of what needs to be happening so that people can perceive this document has structure. There really is a hierarchy of headings and content, or of a bulleted list, and that I didn't just put a little asterisk, you know, tab, asterisk, and content, tab, asterisk, that really is a list. So it goes a little bit beyond that.
Traditionally, open formats have been meant to express more semantics. Unfortunately, as they were forced to emulate more proprietary offerings, they did.
Yeah.
So, but I see your point.
Yeah. But I think this issue, and I think we're going to wrap up here too, but I mean, this is something I learned from Sarah Horton actually when I got here and began teaching about teaching people with different disabilities or different ways of learning, and that oftentimes doing something a little bit differently as the teacher is better for not just those particular students, but for everyone in the group, all students, you know, and this is all kinds of things. If the exam isn't meant to be timed, if you're not trying to teach, you know, I don't need to know if you know it quickly, I just need to know if you know it, then take time out of the, taking that out of the exam. And it sounds like you're kind of talking about the same things, but I feel like I don't know those things to the extent that I might be producing content. I mean, I think it's important that the developers and people we're teaching to write web content, to develop tools, really need to have that. But the rest of us need some of those skills too, to make sure we're not inadvertently producing content that isn't accessible when it's just because it's easier and that's how I know how to do it or something.
Are you pointing folks, Sarah, to any internal, here's what you do list that I can bring up for folks?
No, because as I mentioned earlier, we're very much embarked on a process of moving this forward, but we're sort of at the brink of moving it forward at the college and having more resources available. So I hope that within the next month or so we'll have more to offer.
I will say that on the WebAIM site over in the articles section, I think our introduction is very strong. And we do provide, albeit a little more technical, advice on constructing things that have perceivable, audible, understandable, and robust content. I think it's available for non-technical people. But farther down, if you start looking at the array of tutorials and all this is just available out there, you know, you can see things that people use, PowerPoint, Word, Open Office. You know, lots and lots of different things. And along with that, I'll also just put in a quick plug. We've got a web accessibility evaluation tool, and I won't go into it, that's available to anyone to use, so that they can look at the level of accessibility that their web content has. and hopefully those are some places to start. The last thing I'm going to mention, and then we will wrap up, is that, Sarah, do you think, have you guys answered the question internally as to whether you would be more likely to go 508 or WCAG?
No, we haven't answered that.
Okay, alrighty. Section 508, the federal set of standards. We've got a little checklist for each of them, so you can kind of get a sense. Now, the pass and fail, those were not federally determined. That's our language, but you can see text equivalent for non-text elements, equivalent alternatives for multimedia presentations, web pages, can't rely on color. So in a way, even just understanding what some of these standards are, documents shall be organized so that they're readable. I think some of that is helpful for folks as they're trying to know what to do. So I would hope that folks find some of the, WebAIM materials as useful until such time as your group has a place for folks to land here. Well, thank you guys. You all stayed so much longer than you should have, and that'll teach you to invite me to talk.